Okay, we're ready to start, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar hosted by CAS Severn. We're going to start with a very brief introduction to CAS Severn from our Director of Architecture and Security Services, Shazab Hassan.
Thank you, Connie. Good morning. Thank you for taking your time from your busy schedule to attend this Security Identity Governance webinar. Before I introduce our guest speaker from IBM, let me give you a brief introduction about CAS Severn. CAS Severn is established in 1978, located in Laurel, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C. Beltway. We are focusing on helping the clients to align the technology and their respective business. The CAS Severn has been an IBM business partner for past 30 plus years. Besides working with IBM hardware and software and services, we also provide and services for HP, Dell, Symantec, Cisco, Splunk, Forsco, Cloud, and others. Our cybersecurity professionals offer integrated solutions and services to monitor your data, infrastructure, people, and the physical elements. We have implemented security solutions with different sizes of organizations, including education, healthcare, local, state, federal governments. Our security organization primarily focuses on SIAM, Security Information Event Management, Endpoint Management, Data Protection, Identity and Access Management, Pen Test, Vulnerability Assessment, Network Access Control, and Security and Privacy Compliance, such as PCI, SOX, HIPAA, DoD 8500, NIST 800, and others. We offer different level of services, including managed services, selling software, consulting, and sometimes we work as a trusted advisor. So enough of CAS Severn. So let me introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Shannon Tompkins. Shannon is an IBM's cybersecurity technical specialist focusing on identity and access management. Before joining IBM, Mr. Shannon Tompkins served 15 years in the Fortune 250 organization as a global security architect and global manager for identity access management. Shannon also served as the adjunct instructor teaching 400-level network security courses for the University of Louisville. Mr. Shannon Tompkins, it's all yours.
Well, all right. Thank you, Shazab. Thank you, Connie. Before I begin, can you hear me okay? Am I coming through okay, Shazab?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you for that kind introduction. Let me kind of begin on talking about the agenda really quickly. What we are here to accomplish, it's going to be an initial brief overview of identity and access management. That's going to lead in really kind of to the core of what we're here to discuss and to show as well, and that is the core components of our leading industry-leading solution called IBM's IBM Security Identity Governance and Compliance, or IGI for short. And then I'll show some of those key core component features in a live demonstration. Okay, so right before we begin, and put it all into perspective, who is IBM Security, or who is IBM in security? Many people know us for our brands such as QRadar or AppScan or Guardium, our XGS network appliances, our identity and access management solutions, which are pretty vast, of which we're going to focus on one particular area today. Overall, we're in the top two of the leading security vendors worldwide in terms of revenue. And then some of the other kind of really compelling statistics are right there on the screen. I won't go through each of them. But we're a large presence, and we've been in the identity and access management field since kind of the onset or the boom within the industry. So what is identity and access management? Let's just put that into perspective then as well, and we'll kind of narrow our way down into what we're here to talk about more precisely. Really kind of a combination of the identity side, the access side. Together we just call it IAM, whether we're talking about automated provisioning and deprovisioning services. So we have authoritative source information, maybe coming from an HR system, maybe coming from a request for access system, and then that feeds all of our target endpoints with accounts, with group memberships, attributes, passwords, password synchronizations, so that we have a streamlined identity flow of our individuals. We also have governance capabilities now included in this kind of industry segment that is meeting such needs as recertifying the access of our end users. We're going to talk about that quite a bit and actually show some of that in demo today. Doing things such as role modeling and role mining. That's on the identity side. On the access side, it's a whole series of authentication and authorization components, maybe a central control point to be able to meet those application protection requirements. And let's talk about that really briefly then as well. About identity, but again, just to kind of show the larger picture of identity and access management, talk just briefly about access management. So in access management, without an access management solution in place, it's very typical for an organization as it grows to have a series of different types of individuals that need access to resources. Those resources, typically enterprise cloud or enterprise web-based applications, mobile-based applications, workloads that are out in the cloud, SaaS applications. Okay, and so each of those applications, each of those systems would be responsible for its own security module, its own user storage location, maybe a database, or maybe it's binding to an LDAP, or maybe it's talking back to Active Directory, but it has to authenticate and authorize. So a lot of disparate policies, perhaps, if it's managed at the application by application level. When you put an access management solution in place, you can protect those workloads, those applications, those native mobile apps with a central control point, providing all your authentication services, all your authorization services, all of your maybe risk-based access controls, meaning time of day type considerations or policies, or maybe from the perspective of, hey, this person just accessed this environment 3 minutes ago, but now they're accessing it from a geographical location that is hundreds of miles away. Does that meet our policy, or should we do something such as deny the access or step up to another form of authentication? Doing things such as sending that other form of authentication through an SMS text one-time passcode, for instance, or registering a device such as what we see in front of our consumer banking applications. So a lot of times we come into a banking application from a new iPad, it'll say, hey, we've never seen you come in from this before. We need to send you an authorization code. That's what an access management solution provides, and that's actually what IBM has in a very well-known access management solution called Security Access Manager, and that provides that the federated single sign-on components, including protocols such as SAML, OpenID, Connect, OAuth. It's got the risk-based access controls. It's got the basic web protections, mobile app access protections, API protections. And that's all kind of within the access management side of the house. Okay. But what about the identity? That's what we're really here to focus on. Okay. On the identity management side, what's the evolution of identity management, identity governance, identity analytics? Well, identity and access management really kind of took a lead in the industry. It really took off in the industry in the early to mid 2000s, and that's actually when IBM jumped into the industry game as well, or became a player in the game and a leader, been known leader by our Gartner analysts and others really since the onset. And so it started with the need to primarily automate the additions and removals of identities, password synchronizations, all through some almost like a middleware data movement application tier. That's really where it got its start. Now as we move on to today's more modern times, security has become a key important component of our identity and access management strategies. We all can see in the news and know that one of the easiest access methods for attackers is to gain credentials and to use those credentials to escalate their privileges, to gain access to systems. So we want to have tight control of our identities and our access to minimize that attack surface, to reduce that risk. That really brings a lot of governance components into play. And we're moving and evolving into an analytical space where we are actually then combining what views of individuals should have access to and monitoring and regularly attesting to that access to the governance components, but with also what are they actually truly doing, and rolling those all into an analytical data intelligence model that we can compare what they should be doing, what they are doing, where are those anomalies, and alerting and making modifications accordingly. So that's kind of the flow of identity and access management. So where does the governance component come into the conversation? Okay. Well, from a financial reporting perspective, for instance, or industry mandates, or privacy mandates, there's a lot of industry requirements now that are requiring us to show proof or evidence that we are meeting control requirements. There's an exorbitant number. Many organizations have to comply with numerous mandates, as well as our own security policies. So what ultimately happens is our C-level executives, they know very well that they are on point to ensure that this is being managed accordingly. They may then roll down to their audit team and say, hey, are we protected both professionally as an organization and maybe even personally at the personal liability state? Have we been meeting these mandates? Are we secure? That's where the governance component really comes into play. And what do we actually see in occurring commonly? It's really kind of this process where the question then gets asked from the C-level executives. And I'll walk through this. Are we properly managing our user access? Can you say that we're going to actually pass our audits? And that may then be voiced to the internal audit team. The internal audit team says, well, I've got to look into this. And so the internal auditor has to go do a series of checks to routinely validate that we're meeting compliance controls. So they're talking to our IT security team. Can you prove, for instance, in this particular example, that John Smith has the appropriate permissions for his job, and is this going to meet our mandate requirements? Well, IT security will go back to the application manager and say, you know, can you confirm that John actually has the proper access for your application? Of which case they then say, I can tell you what access they have, but I don't know if it's appropriate. So the IT security person then has to go to the business manager that oversees maybe that individual from an organizational structure and say, well, should they have this access? And without the proper tools in place, commonly, they may say, I wish I could tell you, but it's all very hard for me to manage through this, and it's very technical, and I don't quite understand what this is showing me. So we kind of have this gap, and that leads to, or can lead to, the audit findings that we are having poor visibility into who's got access into what. We may lack, without proper controls in place, without the governance controls, the visibility to be able to determine or show to our auditors that we've got controls over separation of duty capabilities, meaning we want to be able to validate that we are not giving individuals the access to approve a purchase, but then also make the purchase or manage cash in a similar way. Separation of duties, segregation of duty controls. We have a challenge with that, so looking for solutions. And we have manual efforts to retrieve and to validate and to do attestation campaigns and do certification campaigns. Without the tools that are scoped particularly for that solution, we find ourselves working very diligently, very manually to acquire evidence that we are meeting those mandate requirements. Okay? And very quickly too, then we're going to get into some demonstrations, but each of these kind of topics are leading to some of the things we want to demonstrate in the IBM solution. Another area that we face from an identity provisioning side that becomes a challenge is this concept of roles, of sometimes mixing the concept of roles and the permissions that are associated with those roles with trying to control the segregation of duty violation requirements. Meaning this, so roles are great, excellent for being very efficient to give access to entitlements based on commonalities of individuals, such as geographical location they may be in, their job role, some combination of attributes, accordingly, that would say those individuals with these commonalities should all get these base level permissions, maybe birthright access based on roles, maybe discretionary access. I want to request the ability to do this function, and therefore each of these series of permissions should be granted to fulfill that role. However, if we want to then manage our separation of duty controls based on roles, we've got the challenge of constantly having to ensure that we don't have any new violations every time we change the permissions within a role. So there's a different way, in a way that we like to think of it, that is much more manageable, a set it and forget it type way. And that is the manner of what we call our business activities. Okay, so again, we're talking about risk and we're talking about the separation of duty controls, and we're going to actually demonstrate some of this to show it more clearly in coming up here shortly. And that is, rather than manage the permissions that violate with one another, which ones are toxic, a combination of these permissions that are toxic with one another from a segregation of duty control perspective, rather than managing them at the role level, which are continuously and always changing, how about if we manage them at the actual activity at the business level of what they're trying to accomplish? So let's forget about roles that are used for entitlement provisioning. Let's focus on the actual activities that they're trying to address. So our HR teams, our audit teams are very well versed in already having control elements dictating all the key activities that are occurring in our organization across all the various departments. How about if we map the actual permissions to those activities and let our data analytical model determine in every access request, every access grant, whether or not we have any conflicts at the base level, entitlement level that's matched at the activities. So we take the activities and we define which activities are actually conflicting with one another, and then the tool will decide based on our entitlements mapping whether they've been given roles or entitlements or requested access or granted access automatically that might conflict. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. It's a key component of our solution. So that brings us to, before I actually show demonstrations, let me introduce to you IBM's Identity Governance and Intelligence. Okay, three major components of it. It's lifecycle management, and that is the provisioning, deprovisioning, automation components, all the adapter capabilities to talk to our endpoints, the request for access considerations, mixed in with our compliance core features to meet our attestation review campaign components, maybe our separation of duty controls, as well as our analytics. What is our risk levels, sensitive access delineations, what is the level of violations that we have or the mitigations at the separation of duty control capabilities. Altogether, that is our identity governance and intelligence solution. Okay, and that's kind of what we're really here to discuss, to show, to demo. A quick view of where we stand, and this is the most recent 2016 Gartner Magic Quadrant. We have been a leader in this space since the onset of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and there's where we are today, up there in the leader view per Gartner's assessment. Gartner, and I like to stress that segregation of duty because Gartner themselves have highlighted that as a really core area that differentiates IBM's solution from others. For those environments that truly have a separation of duty compliance requirement, some industries are highly mandated in that manner, then it stands out to Gartner as a real feasible option for managing that efficiently and effectively. Okay, so in the demo environment, these are the things that I want to show. Okay, doing a quick check of time. We've got ample time to be able to present this. Just maybe three main areas. So to start, I've got a demo environment that's just on a virtual machine here locally, includes the application, which IGI is actually comes on a virtual appliance. I can kind of maybe talk about what IGI is at the end, but focusing just on the features, or not talking quite about topology. From my demo environment, I've got all the core components of IGI and the data store necessary to be able to show this, along with ample data that shows what would appear to be a real organization. So this is all occurring locally. It's just a sandbox, so to speak. I'm going to show access certification campaigns. I'm going to show what one looks like, going to show how easy it is to set one up, and talk about the other kind of campaigns that are part of the solution as well, in addition to just access certification, and explain a little bit more what that is. Show the business activity modeling, just very high level, for the segregation of duty management. And I also want to touch on what does our tool look like to be able to do role mining capabilities, to identify new role considerations in a sandbox environment. And if we like what we see in the analytics that are presented back to us of what would be potentially very good new roles to invoke into our environment, we can roll them into the production environment. So I'll show how that actually looks. Okay, so let's move into the access certification campaigns. I'm going to demonstrate a new campaign, and I'm going to then also show you what it looks like to build a campaign, just as I mentioned, and we'll come back to this and talk about, well, what other campaigns are there within our solution other than just access certification. Okay, so let me pause for a second and bring up a demo environment. So I am going to just bring up a browser, and this is a console that I'm going to access directly from just a web browser. And I've got administrator control capabilities with a logon there, and I've got Service Center, and this would be our end user view. Okay, administrator controls or the administrator console are going to be for administrators who are going to configure components within the system. The Service Center is where our individuals, our line of business managers, our end users are going to work to do things such as respond to an access certification campaign, or to do password reset, self-service capabilities, or request for access capabilities. So let's start there, and let me explain real briefly. In my campaigns, as I set them up, and the one that I'm going to demonstrate, this first one I'm going to demonstrate is an organization, the whole organizational view of everyone who's got access. I'm going to review all their access, let's say, and the managers themselves are the ones who are going to be the recipients of this campaign, and the managers would have received an email notification to say, okay, it's time to do a new access certification campaign. Here's the link. Please go out to the service center and log on. But in addition, when we configure these, we also configure a supervisor of the access certification campaign. So before I log in as a manager, I'm just going to log in as a supervisor, and her name is Miriam Brewer. Okay, and I'm just going to show she's got a view of the active campaigns that are actually going on in our organization today, and she can drill on down to see what the status is at the campaign level or at the individual approval level for any particular user, for instance, in an access review campaign. So when she logs into a service center, she has an immediate dashboard, and there's some just clear indications of things she can see. We can configure this any way we want. We can have pie charts. We can have things, but for this demo environment, I just have a straight dashboard that's showing status of campaigns, her entitlements. She can request access. I also have a menu item up here, and it just seems a little bit easier if I go to the menu item and just say Access Certifier. So as the supervisor of the campaigns, she sees that there are a couple that are not active because their status is in pause at the moment, but there are a few campaigns that are active, including this one right here, the Company Access Review Campaign. So when she opens it up, she sees the view of every manager who must respond to this. This is a new campaign. I just set it up this morning in preparation for showing it in a demonstration. It shows that it started today and it ends in April. So there's ample time for our end users, our line of business managers to go in and to provide approvals or revocations. And in this case, since it's brand new, barely anybody has begun yet, but she can see the status just at a glance of level of completion. And in this case, David Fox has already begun. So let's go look to see if we can get some statistical information about David Fox's progress. Okay, it'll just say, a view at a glance of how much he still has remaining, but I can drill on down. Now again, this is the view from the supervisor level of David Fox's requirement to do this campaign, and so you can see the amount of effort that he's actually put into approving or revoking access for individuals. We also have at a glance, just to point this out because this will come up again a little bit later, we have views of risk that may be associated with these individuals because it might highlight something that we might want to look at right away. And so why does this person have risk? What is it about them? We can look to see that David Fox has already approved a couple of different accesses, but he's revoked one of the accesses. And when you revoke it, it can manually fulfill that revocation, or you could just alert upon that revocation. I'll talk a little bit about that when I show setting one up. But I can get into more information about the user, etc. Drill on down. Okay, so that's the view from the actual supervisor, but that supervisor's only monitoring the progress. So let's go ahead and log out. Let's log in as the manager himself that she was just looking at. So let's take a look at David Fox. Okay. David Fox has his view of dashboards, whatever was configured for him particularly to see when he gets in. And when he goes into Access Certifier, he's got one campaign available to him. So as a manager, he's got one campaign that he was just alerted about, the one that you just saw from the viewpoint of the the supervisor. So right now, all of this is still active. He can go in, and the way we've configured this, or I've configured this particular campaign, is that you don't commit any of these changes until you are completely done and you choose to commit them. So you can go back and you can make changes at any time. I can drill on down to this, for instance, and see the same view that Miriam saw. She could not make any changes because she was just a reviewer as a supervisor. But I can say, oh, wait, I was wrong there. I want to approve that one. I shouldn't revoke that one. And I can go through, and if I've configured it the way that will allow bulk operations, I can actually say, well, these three individuals, I already know them well. I'm going to just say approve all. So there's a lot of capabilities. The intention here of this interface is to be very user-friendly, to be able for our reviewers to drill on down and see the specific permissions of which they're actually approving or revoking. They can escalate these. I don't know if I've got that configured in this particular campaign, but if they don't know a particular, let's see if I do, if they don't know a particular person or entitlement well enough, I can redirect. I can redirect or I can escalate. Redirect is by saying, hey, I'm redirecting it to another manager who I know, might know this person, okay? And then that person will now show up. This will show up on their campaign. It's been removed from mine. I can escalate it, which goes to the supervisor with some notice about why this one needs some greater attention. Okay? I forgot to mention at the start that I am very happy to take questions at any time. It just dawned on me now as I'm just pausing for a second just to mention it. And I think the facility for it would be just to raise your hand in the interface itself, and our moderator, Connie, would be able to turn on a mic and let me know that we have a question. I will also take any questions at the end as well, but I certainly welcome any comments, conversation as we progress. Okay, so I was just trying to give a brief overview, which I just did, of what a campaign looks like. Again, this is an Access certification campaign. I looked at it from the perspective of what an overall supervisor can see, and I also looked at it from the perspective of a line of business manager interacting with it. You know, we can approve, we can revoke, and those things will be automatically fulfilled. But what does it look like as an administrator to set one up? Okay, so let's go back out and let's actually become an administrator. So now we're getting into the actual administration console over IGI solution set. Now, as an administrator, I've got all my modules available to me. When I logged in as an end user, I only saw what I was authorized to see from an end user's perspective. So now when I go in, I'm going to actually configure a new campaign. Okay? And just to pause for a second, and you can kind of see as I'm drilling down all the different components. Right now we're kind of in a user view of individuals. But I'm going to go into a configuration view for a certification campaign. And there, in fact, is the one that we were just interacting with. These are the various elements of this campaign. But I'm going to walk through starting a new one. So rather than walking through the tabs, let's just do that interactively. Let's create a whole new campaign. First, there's two parts to it. I have to create a data set. A data set is all the analytical view of what it is that I'm going to be assessing. So I have to kind of point to or filter down to those elements that need to be assessed in a campaign. So I got to create the data set first. I want to create a new data set. Oh, it's over here, and I got to edit it. And let's say it's going that there's different types of campaigns, which I'll talk about in the end. And again, this is a user assignment campaign. That's the one that we're most generally, commonly, our individuals that I speak with are most familiar with. You know, just reviewing the access of our individuals. I'm going to say, let's see, so I was setting one up earlier just to do north. Let's say it's an AD south data set. So what am I saying here? I'm going to filter this down to the application of Active Directory, all the Active Directory permissions, and I'm going to filter it down to an organizational unit that I've got in my environment, in my view of my identity management system. That's going to be the south part of our production environment, our south geographical location, for instance, just for sake of discussion. Okay, and let me save that so I can actually then apply some attributes. This has the ability then to control what it is that I'm filtering down to. So it's going to be the product division. That's what I was trying to identify. I'm going to actually say the south organizational unit of the product division is going to be included in this data set, which will then also be included in the campaign. And I'm going to add it. Oh, data select not selected. Oh, sorry. South data set. Drill on down. Choose south, and if there were any other OUs underneath south, I could choose the whole hierarchy. So I'm just going to do that just for sake of habit. So now I've got filtering it down to the south view of our product division, and I want to filter it down to the actual all the entitlements that are involved with Active Directory. Okay. Users, all my users are going to be included. All my entitlements for Active Directory be included. All my risk elements. Okay. Let me go back into the data set for a second, because I feel like I've got to also choose the management team as those recipients of it. So let me just take a quick sec. Oh, that's the data set. Okay. Now I want to build a campaign. Sorry. Okay. So now, I'm sorry. So I was configuring the data set. So now let me build a campaign that's associated with that data set. And I'm just going to call it okay. So that's going to be the South data set that we just created. It's going to be a user assignment campaign. We're going to say any former or any other overlapping campaign does not need to be reviewed again over the last, say, 1 month, so that we're not having to have our end users to have to review something they already reviewed in another campaign if they happen to be within scope for more than one campaign. And I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to allow bulk operations, and I'm going to sign off, meaning all the changes are going to be committed by the user. They can choose when they want to actually commit all their changes, so they can go back and make changes anytime until they've committed them. Okay, let's save that. Now that I've saved it, I can go in and I can say that I'm going to actually make a supervisor for this campaign, and I'm going to Brewer. Only one shows up because she's in an organizational role that gives her supervisor capabilities for the campaigns. Okay, and that was the one that we logged in previously to see how she saw it. I'm going to say the reviewers are going to be managers. Those who we've identified in in a hierarchy known as managers based on an attribute that came from an authoritative source that indicated that they were a manager with their linkages of those that they manage. Okay. Allow redirection, and in case I configure a time status to say that they haven't had any activity for a week, then it can actually go to a default reviewer. So I can have like a backup reviewer that this would then redirect to if I'm not showing any activity. Okay, so in here now I'll pause there just so we can run this, but I won't go into many more changes, but just show you what else is capable. We can choose whether or not we're going to just flag these changes if we revoke it, or if we're going to actually make some custom behavior through some workflow, if we're going to actually fulfill those changes. We can schedule the start and end time. So starting today, I'm going to give it a duration of, let's say, it's a 2-week campaign. Hey, it's an emergency. We really got to do this. Okay. How do I notify the end users? The various templates that we have available that we can modify accordingly. We point to them here for all the different reminders and notices about it occurring, and then a final view of what, there's a view of what data we're going to actually include in this. Okay, so now that I've got it, I've created it, I'm now going to launch it. Okay, so it's got to take a moment here. What it's doing, excuse me, what it is doing now is going through from that data set perspective and finding all the entitlements that are in scope for that view that we just scoped it to then make them aligned with managers. Okay, and that is complete. So let me log out. Let me just take a look now at what this looks like. Let me go back into the Service Center, and because I haven't captured who was actually a manager of the South Division, let me log in as Miriam Brewer as a campaign supervisor and see what she sees inside this campaign. Let's make sure this campaign is active and see who is there to see it. Okay, access review, there's the South side. And we have a whole number of different managers that are now responsible from the South Product Division for complying with this review environment. Over here on my right-hand side, I can see how many entitlements. We don't have the data populated too much on the South side, but here's one that's got 5 entitlements. So let's take note of him, R. Brenner. If I look down to R. Brenner, he should have 5 different individuals that he's responsible for reviewing, as well as their accesses. And I can't make changes again because I'm the supervisor. I'm just reviewing the status of the campaign. But if I go in as, what was the one I just chose? Oh, this is R. Bremner. I don't know that I know this person's password because I didn't take time in advance to actually choose that one. But if I were to change this password to something I know for the demo purposes and go in, I would now see the same view and I could interact with it accordingly, which is the way we just showed it. So I won't go on and and show it or repeat it again. But again, what I was doing and what we've done so far is, let me go back to kind of show you a status of what we've kind of accomplished here. Where we were is we demonstrated a user assignment campaign. We looked at it from the perspective of Miriam Brewer, who was a campaign supervisor. She could see all the campaigns that are active in the environment currently, even those that are on pause, so that she can see them because she was the assignee that we configured to be the supervisor. And then we also went in as an end user and we took a look at how to interact with a certification campaign. And then we also then showed what it looked like to configure one and then validate that that campaign was indeed active, had brought in all the entitlements, had correctly aligned them with the individuals who are assigned those entitlements, and then had aligned those with the managers per our designation in that configuration. Okay, and that's an access assignment or a user assignment campaign. I won't demonstrate any further on campaigns, but let me just talk very briefly what else, what other capabilities are there from a campaign perspective. Okay, so similarly, the interface looks the same, but we have different purposes for these campaigns. We can, for instance, run a campaign showing all the segregation of duty violations and whether or not those SOD violations or other risk elements, such as those entitlements that we've designated as highly sensitive entitlements, highly sensitive access entitlements. Maybe it's the PCI control area of our network that is highly segmented and only a few administrators have access to that card data, and therefore we call it sensitive access, and we want to flag that as sensitive access. And therefore they've got certain risk associated with them because they've got access to that that particular data. So they can so we can run risk campaigns to say now they've been given that access, but what do we also do to mitigate that that risk that's now been added to our environment based on that sensitive access existing and people having access to it. Okay, so we can run a campaign for everybody to review whether or not the proper mitigations are in place, to approve those mitigations accordingly. Okay, we can also do things such as how our entitlements are scoped at the OU level. Have we this is a hierarchical view of data model where we can say these accesses are only visible to the south side of our product division, and we can validate that it can go through the data analytics to ensure that only those individuals that are in the south division actually have entitlements that are intended for the south division. Or maybe it's better to say, maybe from a compliance perspective again, that a certain OU has been configured or a certain other attribute has been assigned to say who's got access to sensitive information. And what we can run as a campaign of all the outliers, someone else who happens to have access that we didn't think should have access, so that we can see those outliers from a campaign perspective. We can run them on a routine basis. We can even run them in real time, called a continuous campaign. So when something does get flagged outside of the normal, campaign will automatically generate and send someone a notice to review it. Okay, we can also attest to the efficacy of our roles. Do our roles that we have in our environment have the proper permissions? So we might run a campaign for all the role managers to review the roles that they oversee and to ensure that the entitlements are assigned accordingly. And finally, do our target systems have the proper accounts? Do our individuals have the proper accounts in the target systems, or do we have any anomalies? Meaning, I might need an AD account, a DB2 account across multiple systems, and a whole bunch of various endpoints, maybe even cloud accounts that have been provisioned through our IGI provisioning componentry. So we can review who's got access to what from the account perspective, not the entitlement perspective, but just the account perspective, and make decisions accordingly. And we can filter those views down to who should be reviewing very specifically those accesses. Okay, very good. The other ones are going to go pretty fast. This one's going to go. This one's more. I might hesitate on demonstrating because there's not much to demonstrate, and just talk more logically about this, so I can demonstrate the lifecycle management in the time that we have provided. But let me proceed. So we're going to talk now about how our IGI solution is quite unique in helping organizations to manage separation of duty control risks. But let me kind of start conceptually. Okay, and I mentioned this or alluded to this early when I was giving an introduction to what we'll be talking about today. But here's maybe a visual example. Okay, so what we're saying is roles again are great for giving access, very efficient. I think everyone would agree to that that idea. And let's say if you're managing segregation of duty violations on the entitlements that are granted to roles, you might face this scenario where you might say, role 1 and role 2 actually violate one another because they've got these series of permissions that are in those roles that are in violation. This is just a complete example, not even a real-life scenario based on actual activities of any type. But let's just say privilege 1 or permission 1, permission 2 conflicts with permission 5 and permission 6, which are rolled into those roles. Therefore, role 1 and role 2 conflict. However, if I modify those, or if I actually then grant access to, I should have called those roles different names rather than role 1, role 2. That's my mistake. Let's say I call those roles 4 and role 5 in the bottom half, and I also have those permissions in there. Then I've also got to know that those two are violations. And every time we've got that set of permissions that are violating one another at the role level, we've got to manage and flag every possible violation at role level. So, you know, with thousands of roles in the environment, that becomes a real challenging task. And as the permissions are changing over time, then, you know, the question that we face, are we being mindful to always go back and validate whether or not we've modified any segregation and duty control violation alerts accordingly? Either miss now that the violation occurs, or we're flagging that a violation is occurring when it really isn't, because we're flagging at the role level and not the entitlement level. Okay. So what we've got, I think that's kind of in the wrong, a little bit in the wrong order, and I'll go backwards. So how do we manage it then in the IGI solution? We take industry standard views of activities that are very key to an organization. We grab our templates from a standards body, at least as a starting point, called the APQC. The APQC is the, I got to write it down, sometimes I forget, it's the American Productivity and Quality Center, apqc.org, and they've got process classification frameworks. So we are very much aligned with those as a starting point. So every industry, financial, manufacturing, power utilities, has a very well thought out tree of activities. So we manage the violations, and this is what this example is showing, at the business activity level, meaning that this particular business activity in the SOD violation 1 of processing customer usage data conflicts with actually processing their billing data at the same time. Or likewise, processing billing data conflicts with processing the cash remittance capabilities. I mean, so you might be receiving cash, and you might modify from a fraudulent standpoint their actual bill to show that they actually provided less cash than you received, with the capability to do something with that excess cash, you know, from a fraudulent perspective. So how does it work in our model? Well, we define the activity tree that you just saw. We can take a template and we can modify it to our own, you know, titles accordingly. I've put this to the test a number of times in POCs, and I've always been very pleasantly surprised to see from the examples that are provided to us from a customer on a POC violation or series of violations that they'd like to be included in the POC, that the templates for the industry have matched very well. And so I might change the name of a particular branch to more closely align with the way they see it, but there's been a place for it in the built-in templates. So you define the tree, you assign the permissions, the base level permissions that are needed, and that's what I can show a little bit more in detail. It'll only take a second. And then we give the permissions to the activities, and then we give the rules of the activities that conflict. And then in real time, what happens then in the results? Like I said right there, you set that once and you forget it. You don't manage them at the role level. The results are, every time someone requests new access in real time or granted access through automation, then we are constantly mining our data to ensure that at the bare bones permission level and rolling up to the activities that we have no conflicts. And if we have conflicts, we can easily show at the activity level what is conflicting. So we don't have to actually manage them role by role. Okay, and there's an example of like just various industries that are part of the APQC. Just to kind of show what that kind of looks like a little bit more. Looking at my time, we've got 15 minutes approximately, and this is at the admin level. I will show just the business activity tree real briefly. I'm going to go into access risk controls submodule within this. and I'm going to look at, say, manage a business activity tree. So here's what I mean. Here's the one that we've made in our demo environment, probably imported from a template and just modified it to our liking. And so we can drill on down to, again, the view from our audit team of all the key components that drive our business activities, or drive our business, I should say, from accounts payable to human resources, treasury and finance, and you can drill on down all to the activity level. And from here, you can take any particular one and you can link permissions to it. So, for instance, the data entry for payment of personal use, at the very bare minimum, these are the permissions that are required to be granted to somebody to actually do data entry for personnel costs. Okay? Not at the role level, just take those bare permissions, link them to the activity level, and then you have other ones then as well. As not all of these have been filled out in the demo environment with permissions linked to them, but so you can link the permissions to them. And then when I take this, I can easily take a glance and say, what, maybe the better way is to show it, that's maybe the backwards way. Let me actually back up. So we've taken our business activity, we've linked permissions to the business activities, we go into this view then, and we actually create the violations. We say which activities violate which other activities from a separation of duty perspective, okay? And then we can say, okay, this particular two actually violate one another. So that's I want to spend some time on role mining and modeling, and I don't want to beat this one down too much, but in essence, I just want to kind of gain the point across that we have a business activity trees for our industry. We modify them for our business accordingly that actually talk at the HR level or the audit level, and we assign permissions of our IT systems that will allow us to meet those activities. We don't assign them at the role level, and whenever anyone requests access, they will immediately see upon request if they're violating some risk metric or policy that's been configured by our administrators as dictated to us by our audit team, for instance. And we can also we can see that whether they're applying for access, whether we are approving the access. We have indicators throughout the whole environment. If I'm just an administrator looking at the end users, I've got little red dots to show that I've got a violation. I can run campaigns on everybody who's got a risk violation accordingly. Again, we set it and we forget it, so to speak, rather than managing this continuously at the role level. Okay, that applies to many organizations, but not all, who don't manage it at the segregation of duty level. It may or may not be applicable to organizations. So I'd like to also move on to another key component that I intended to show today, which is, let me bring back up a status check of where we are on our progress here. Whoops, sorry. You guys aren't seeing it. I've got two screens here, so there we go. Okay, so now let's talk about role lifecycle management. I didn't have my slides in here to kind of talking about, so let me just talk verbally about what I'm about to show. So what we're going to talk about is mining our data from an analytical view of possibilities for creating new roles. So I've already got all my applications, permissions, and end users in the system. And so if I could say, give me a view of maybe in this particular area of our organization, maybe for this particular application, which I'm about to show you in that example, let's just say, what permissions do X number of people have in common? That looks like that might be a good candidate for a new role. And this can all occur in a sandbox. It's a role mining capability in a nice visual view of role possibilities that are being offered back to us from this tool. And from there, we can say, you know what? I like that one as a real role. Let me actually commit that one and publish it into the system and have the system automatically roll up the entitlements for those individuals. So I'm in the administration tool. Let me give a for instance. I looked this morning to find a good candidate user that's going to get included in this example. And that person is going to be Mary Burns. So, oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong location here. Let me go back to the home screen. So when I look at my end users, I'm going to bring up Mary Burns' identity account here, and I'm going to take a look at all the permissions that she has assigned. Okay, and then I'm going to create role modeling, and I will show how creating a new role actually reduces the view accordingly for permissions. It'll roll a whole series of permissions into a singular role for us. So let me find Mary. This is the example that I had kind of looked at previously. If I look at her entitlements, I will see there's a whole series of active directory permissions that got brought into this environment that are actually kind of, from a visibility perspective, assigned to the North product division, the organizational unit. So that's where I want to do my role mining, because I've already had worked backwards to find an end user who would be positively impacted by rolling all these. What we're trying to accomplish is, let's reduce the number of permissions that are granted to the user. They're going to still have the same access, but let's roll them into a role of commonalities across our whole user environment, so that when it comes time to do access certification campaigns, for instance, our roles might be clearly describing what those elements are. These are common Active Directory permissions for our North Division, for instance. So you've got one thing to review rather than 11, 12, whatever that number is, of individual entitlements, for instance. So you're trying to make your system more efficient. So let's go through that process. I'm going to go back to my home screen so you see where I'm actually working from, and I'm going to go into an access optimizer, and I'm going to do some basic role mining to kind of wrap up our demonstration and show you how this looks. Okay, so I'm going to configure, I'm going to manage role mining. Okay, these are previous role mining examples that I've done, that others have done, have been working from a similar environment. But let's create a new one. So I'm going to add a new role mining exercise, and I'm going to call it AD North, because I'm going to be looking at the North product division, only at the Active Directory permissions. I'm going to say, let's just say we have to at least have people that have 3 entitlements in common with one another before it suggests a new role. And let's say I'm going to cluster them by the highest commonality in the view that it's going to provide here to me graphically. I'm going to drill on down, and I'm going to say, let's just only look at the product division North side, okay, North OU, and let's just limit this to the Active Directory application. Okay, so I'm going through almost like a wizard here, just to give a role mining exercise to have it visually show me some new possibilities. Okay, so I submit that. Right now it's going through the data, and it is finding new role candidates for us. I go down there and I refresh. This will just take a brief moment, and then we can view the data accordingly. It is 11:52, so we're tracking well on time. My intent is, there we go, to show you the new role options, and then actually roll it into production and show you the positive impact that it had. Okay, we'll see here, per the criteria that I set up in that wizard-like interface, I've got 3 new role candidates here. And this particular one has got 37 end users that have 13 Active Directory entitlements in common with another, a total of 481 assignments. Okay, so let's take a look at that visually, for instance, to help us even kind of analyze this further. There we go. We can see a big, large group of end users that have these same Active Directory entitlements aligned with one another. Our research outside of the tool may then look further to find out, you know what, that truly is a new role candidate. We can drill on down to see what those entitlements are, particularly from this view. The application is only AD because we scoped it to AD. Who are all the users that are actually would be impacted by rolling this into these permissions into a role? Again, we're not changing their actual access. We're just changing the model of granting the access at a role level rather than individual entitlement level. But before I proceed, I also want to look to see, you know what, help me tell me if there's going to be any new risk invoked into the system by making a role for these individuals. Meaning, am I going to be granting entitlements within a singular role that actually conflict with one another from a separation of duty perspective? And so I have a tool do that work for me rather than me try to figure it out, and it tells me no conflicting entitlements. So my analysis with the tool and outside of the tool, actually doing some research of my own, conclude that, you know what, this is a really good candidate. Let's see what happens when I turn this actually into a role. Okay, so over here, I then say release it to the the Access Governance Core. Okay, let me highlight that. I'm going to publish it. Okay, and I'm going to publish this role over to our user side of this tool as AD North. Common entitlements. Okay. So that's effectively put it over into the Access Governance core. Let's go back over and see what that means and what do I do from here. So now I've got a new role that's visible to me. I go into my roles, I should see it. And there it is right there. It's not, okay, I'm sorry. The ones that are in bold are actually published. This is now available for publishing. So by publishing it, I now make it visible, so to speak. So now it's published, but I still have to do a data analytics component of consolidating all those entitlements into this new role. So it's not changing the access, it's just changing the alignment of those. And if I were to have made a mistake, I can actually choose to roll back. I'm sorry, dismiss is the actual term. Rollback is another process, but I can dismiss this and it can put it all back to its individual entitlements. So let it do its work here. We've got just a couple of minutes. My final thing to show you is when this is complete, let's go back and look at Mary Burns. And let's look to see, hopefully, in this live demo, she should have a singular entitlement now to replace all those individual entitlements accordingly. So now it's complete. It's finished. So now if I go back to Mary Burns and look at her entitlements, I hope to see that I've got this new role and don't have all those individual Active Directory entitlements granted to her. Oh, I was already in the right spot. Sorry about that. Let me find her. Mary Burns, and I look at the entitlements, and there we go. Or 80 North Commonality. So there we go. So we no longer see all those individual, hard to understand Active Directory entitlements that were, maybe imported through the deployment process or however it was, but they came in with some terms that were hard for our line of business managers to really comprehend. But we've now brought them into a singular role. This role will now show up from a provisioning perspective capabilities. It'll show up in our ability to do certification campaigns and anywhere else where entitlements are included. Okay, and really that concludes. Let me bring back where we are. We were here, and we just now did the demonstration, and we just completed. There's just a couple minutes remaining before the top of the hour, and I want to turn control back to Connie to ask if there are any questions. Connie.
Thank you, Shannon. I haven't received any questions so far, so I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Shannon, for doing this presentation with us. And with that, we're going to end the webinar. Thank you so much.